Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar this morning. For me anyway, I'm based in central US and maybe spread out around the world. This is part of a CEOS deliverable that Nancy Serby and I from NASA agreed to back at last year, I think, a CEOS meeting that we were at. So we'll get more into that in just a second. So I think a lot of people on the line maybe are familiar with CEOS and kind of tie in our relationship with how Nancy and I came to pull this webinar together. Today, my name is Chris Barnes. I'm a contractor with the USGS, work at a facility in the Midwest, the Aero Center. We have Sydney, works from NASA, Yasha from NASA too, and Derek Hanson from NOAA. And Nancy sends her regrets. Unfortunately, she had to go on a last minute travel assignment just before we started this webinar. So she sends her apologies for that. But just a little bit of background on this. So this is part of a CEOS webinar. CEOS was established in 1984 from the G7 Economics Summit. And basically the intent of CEOS is to coordinate EOF benefits for society. Right now there's about 34 space agencies and about 29 associate members. So under that umbrella, we have the Working Group on Capacity Building and Data Democracy, which is what this webinar is sponsored by. And some background on the WGCapD initiative. It was formed back in 2011, I believe, at a CEOS plenary back then. And basically the encompassing mission principles is very much what we're going to present to you today. It's basically providing wider access and easier access to Earth observation data from a plethora of Earth observing satellites, increasing the access to tools and services to use those EO data sets, and also transferring relevant technologies to improve ease of access to those EO data sets for science applications. And basically, and then finally, one of the impetuses behind WGCapD, which is kind of unique to many other working groups, is providing extensive capacity building and training to users. So not just providing access to the data, showing you how to get it, where it's at, but also trying to show you some demonstrations on applications of that data. So, and right now, just to plug the current CEOS training calendar, which is available for free online, has about 32 trainings right now, and there's a bunch of other historical trainings that go back to 2011. So you may want to check that out as well. So we'll start with the first slide, please. Nothing's moving on my end.
Oh, apologies. Let me try again. Sorry.
That's okay. Okay, great. So we're just going to go through some quick introductions because we are going to tackle various aspects of the presentation across the four of us today. So like I said, my name is Chris Barnes. I'm a contractor with the USGS for about 20 years. First half of that, I was a land cover scientist. And then probably the latter half of that, I've been working specifically for the Landsat program, ran the Landsat Science Communications team for several years. Under that, I was able to support the release of the United States Analysis Ready Data product, and also helped in the development of the current Landsat Collection 2, which is the most current Landsat archive that's available through the Amazon Web Service. Most recently, I work with the international ground stations that receive Landsat data around the world. Currently, have about 9 of those. And I've worked with a lot of bilateral agreements with Geoscience Australia, ESA, DLR, and ISRO. And also, I wear a hat for CEOS, working with the Land Surface Imaging Virtual Constellation, and WGCapD, which is how we came up with putting this webinar together based on a meeting that Nancy and I were at in Europe early last year. So, Sydney, would you like to give your quick intro?
Yeah, happily. Hi, everyone. I'm Sydney Neugebauer. As Chris mentioned, I work at NASA in our Earth Science division within the Capacity Building Program, which is our tie to CapD. We've been longtime members of this organization. And the Capacity Building Program works under 4 main elements, including RSET, which is our training program, DEVELOP, which is workforce development, SERVIR, which is international co-developed projects, and the Indigenous Peoples Initiative, which works with Indigenous groups in the United States, and all relate to building capacity to use Earth observations to make decisions or to inform actions, just all in different ways and with different communities. So I've been working there for about 3 years in this role and at NASA for about 5 years. And I'll pass it over to Yasha for an introduction.
Thank you. I'm Sydney's colleague, also supporting NASA's capacity building program, primarily our engagements with other capacity building network and fellow space agencies around the world that do trainings around the issues of Earth observation. And one of the things that one of the hats I wear, I'm a member of the Secretariat for Earth Observation Training Education Capacity Development Network, or EOTech DevNet, that's been started by WGCapD with colleagues from GEO, United Nations, WMO, etc., to bring together colleagues who are working on capacity building issues across these networks. I'm going to pass it on to Derek.
Hello, everyone. I'm Derek Hanson. I'm an attorney advisor at the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I've been working at NOAA for almost 14 years now, and as an attorney for about half that time. I'm also the chair of the Law and Policy Subgroup in the Group on Earth Observations Data and Knowledge Working Group. And so I'll be speaking primarily in that capacity about GEO's work on open science and open knowledge.
Thanks, everyone. We'll go to the next slide, please. This is why I asked you to drive, Sydney.
And I'm not doing a great job of it yet. I think it should be set now.
Okay. You'll be done by 45 minutes. Okay, so here's a quick overview of the agenda. Go through our purpose, kind of what some definitions are, and then going through like 4 main pillars of open science, and then hand it over to Derek on open licensing at EO, and then some resources, and then some questions, and hopefully a little bit of discussion. Please note that this is being recorded, and we'll make it available on demand via the CapD webpage, pretty much at the conclusion of this, I think. And just to say, as we're doing this 45-minute webinar, we do encourage you to post any questions or give any feedback about what your agency is doing or what you would like to see your agency doing, what barriers you may have in trying to move the needle onto open source science or open science, and what other resources, and is there any follow-up that you would like to see from us at the culmination going in the future after we've done this webinar here today. So, okay, next slide.
I thought I had it. I'm so sorry. I don't know if anyone has any tips for sharing the PowerPoint. I'm sharing it as a PowerPoint window, but here we go.
Okay. So the purpose today is what you may have guessed from the title. We want to illustrate how agencies are showing their commitment to enabling scientific discoveries and increasing people's understanding and what open science principles and techniques really are. So you may have seen this terminology called TOPS, Transform to Open Science, was an initiative that was launched in December of 23 from NASA. And that was just about a year after the US federal government initiated this push for federal agencies to open up their tools, algorithms, data to facilitate open science. So when TOPS was released in December of 23, that was hot on the heels of an Open Science 101 5 training module program that was delivered to scientists and researchers to give them the tools and resources to engage and really encourage open science. So kind of the umbrella of this webinar is to promote this TOPS initiative, primarily coming from the federal government side, but that we are seeing other international space agencies, data providers also trying to adopt these open science principles and techniques to improve and facilitate access to EO data. Next slide. So what is open science? And I took this directly from the memo that came from the White House Office of Science and Technology. And basically, it's a principle of making research products. So anything from algorithms, theoretical basis documents, publications, available to anybody, no matter where they are, whether in the US, outside the US, but also respecting other cultures and their beliefs and maintaining security and privacy to systems. So there has to be a certain element of security to allowing people access to certain algorithms and systems and servers. So, but it's not all encompassing of complete open access. But and a main impetus behind this is trying to have reproducible science. So giving the tools, the data, and the methods that we use to generate some scientific results. So that's kind of the umbrella of open science that we're forming under this. Next slide. So there's also several terminologies that you'll hear today. Kind of already talked about what open science is. Another term is open data. Pretty obvious what that is. In 2008, the USGS opened the Landsat archive to make it free and open. Prior to that, some people may remember that have used Landsat data in their research. When the Landsat program was privatized, people had to pay for individual Landsat scenes. They were either printed out on paper or delivered on various types of media over the mail, and the cost ranged from about $650 up to over $4,000, which was quite astonishing. So trying to do global scale studies back then was pretty much impossible unless you had a very significant budget. Other agencies, NASA, NOAA, also have made their data repositories free, and also our European colleagues have also made their Sentinel Copernicus program data sets also freely available. And many other space agencies now are seeing the benefit to why making those data sets freely and open available. Open source talks pretty much like programs or algorithms, the source code that was used to generate the scientific results, making those available to the public. And then open access, we're defining that as providing access to theoretical basis documents, any user guides, and obviously scientific publications, making those freely available to the general public and the user community. Next slide. And something that Sydney found while we were putting this this webinar together was it wasn't just the US government that initiated the Open Science Initiative back in 2021. UNESCO had a recommendation that open science should be adopted. And in this document, they came on a common definition for what open science is and what it means, what the values are, and set some guiding principles around that for what open science should really mean for the EO community. And they also define some priority areas of action. So I encourage you to take a look at that document as it pertains to your organization and how you can be a part of this open science initiative. And part of that report highlighted that not every country has equal access or enjoys equal access to EO data and tools and services and publications that engender scientific results. So we highlighted this. We want you to kind of consider that as we do this webinar this morning, of what barriers you may have in your organization or how things are going well and what lessons learned that you've had. We'd love to hear from them, and hopefully that helps others that are on the call here today as well. Next slide. So we call these the open science pillars, and this is kind of how TOPS was organized, and we really liked these 4 pillars in order to help encapsulate this webinar this morning. So we have transparent science, accessible science, inclusive science, and reproducible science. So each of us are going to take a turn at kind of just touching on each of these points this morning. And they're fairly self-explanatory. So transparent science, making that the scientific process and results visible. People can see how you got those results and that they're understandable through publications and access to data. Accessible science, providing tools and software completely accessed without any restriction to to the user community, being inclusive, being cognitive of other diverse cultures and organizations, and ultimately being able to reproduce science. So providing the exact tools, services, data that would allow others to produce the exact same results as what's been published. So I'm going to kick off with transparent science. This is a graphic that I came across from the NASA's Earth Science data system, which I think really encapsulates what we're talking about today. So on the far left, we have fully closed system where there's like no public access to data, very hard to get access to publications and any insight into the process. Moving the needle to the right, still open. The door opens a little bit to data access and publications, but there are some costs involved in that. And more as we move further to the right, which is where I see a lot of our federal agencies and a lot of other space agencies are moving towards this fully open, inclusive culture of being allowed access to data, algorithms, unrestricted, to be able to reproduce scientific results. And I see that's where there still needs to be a lot more improvement. I would say we're just kind of to the 3/4 of fully open science. I think there's still some improvements that we could do to get there to fully open science, and that's the whole impetus behind the TOPS initiative, which is a 5-year initiative for encouraging open science. There's still a lot of technologies and practices that we still need to do to enable to move fully to the right of this graphic and become more fully open. So, and then I'll pass to Sydney, who will talk about the next pillar of accessible science.
Awesome. Thank you for the introduction, Chris. Yeah, so regarding accessible science, we mean this in a couple of different ways, and so I'll show a few examples of those. I just pulled a couple of examples of what's been going on at NASA since we really leaned into the year of open science last year and have some exciting results to show out of it. So thinking about accessible science, in large part, I think about being able to access not only data, but also code, information, teaching tools, all those kinds of things. And that's being enabled by what we have that's called a science discovery engine. I think, NOAA has a very similar thing I'll show on the next slide. This is currently in beta for NASA and will be completed and rolled out in fall of 2024. But it's basically an integrated search portal, so you can search across all of NASA's information, across all the different divisions of science, so even including solar science and heliophysics, space science, not just earth science. So basically it's a search engine. You can search, for example, I searched up lightning and got about 1,000 different results. Maybe 100 of them are related to data, and you can find what you need easily by using filters. So it's just one way to make science more accessible and findable, I think would be the word. And then I also wanted to mention the other way we're doing it is by putting data on the cloud. So previously we'd have to require a lot of storage to download and use all of NASA's data, but we're now working on bringing all of the most commonly used data sets to the cloud and eventually leave all of our data. So currently the top 75 most downloaded NASA Earth Science data sets were migrated to the cloud back in 2022, which is just a huge amount of data, and we're continuing to do more and more of that. And that's in an effort to make data more accessible to people that might have trouble accessing data that is not available on the cloud, for example. All right, and then another aspect, or I guess example of accessible science to share is NOAA's One Stop, which is a different name, kind of a similar look to what I just showed, but this is, again, and it's an interoperable tool, so you can explore all of NOAA's data from different scientific disciplines, different formats, time periods, and locations all across the globe. So similarly, this has a huge number of collections that you can search. You can search, exploring popular topics is one example, searching on location or date, different attributes. And then filtering through the different records so you can really find what you need and better access all of the science data available. Those are just two examples of accessibility in science. But we'll talk about a couple of other examples of what these things can mean at the end, and a lot of them kind of run together. So for now, I'll pass it to Yasha, who's going to talk about inclusive science.
Thank you so much, Sydney. So excited to be here. As you may know, NASA for the longest time had four core values that were excellence, safety, integrity, and teamwork that we're known for. But a few years ago, we added one more core value that is inclusion. And since then, been kind of hard work to put that into practice. You can track our progress in the annual reports. The most recent one is listed here, and I'm sure we'll be sharing the slides and links when the webinar recording will be published. But you can also Google the Equity Action Plan that sets goals and directives for NASA to put its money where its mouth is by investing in underserved communities through contracting through them, or giving out grants, also engaging a more diverse group of students and professionals to build a diverse STEM workforce. But also maybe more closely related to what we're talking about today is increasing the accessibility and use of earth science data. Some examples Sydney already shared, but another one is NASA launched an Earth Information Center that has both physical presence in Washington, D.C., but also a ton of resources online to increase that accessibility of earth science and data for users. And of course, English is not everyone's first language, myself included. And we're trying to do more things to improve language access policies, and some examples of that listed here. For example, we hosted an Open Science 101 study group in Spanish in partnership with Metadocencia. So that resource is also available online. Talk about the next part on the next slide. Inclusion, right, means engaging with others. It means including others, and that does include underserved communities and indigenous communities as well. And we do it for many reasons. One, I mean, it's mandated by some international bodies such as United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People and this Nagoya Protocol that is referenced on this slide, that also kind of paved the way to provide guidance and protection of indigenous resources and data. But we're also doing it because it's the right thing to do, and the science gets better for it by including more diverse voices in the conversation, right? And again, given the history of extractive scientific practices in the name of research and how it affected the marginalized communities, including indigenous groups, it really behooves us to invest by establishing those relationships, building trust. It's a process that takes long time, but again, it's worth doing it. Some examples include hosting conversations and community forums that include representatives from the indigenous communities, and working with indigenous data sovereignty networks such as Global Indigenous Data Alliance, and taking into account the principles for indigenous data governance. They also kind of linked here. I thought they were really informative. So I encourage you to look at that paper. I'll post a link in the chat to it as well. But those principles include collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. All very important as we open the science more, but do it in an inclusive way that takes into account some sensitivities around the data rights and sovereignty. Okay, we can go to the next slide that I think talks about the next value, next pillar rather of open science, with reproducible science. And again, we're trying to do more in this regard. So NASA issued a space policy directive on scientific information policy, and you can see sort of again the mandate we're given as if things are funded by NASA, such as publications, they need to be made openly available, and research data and software to be shared at the time of publication, trying to release mission data as soon as possible, and also be more open around the science workshops and meetings to kind of enable broad participation by also giving other people online options, or kind of reduce barriers in other ways. And we also talk about how we're moving a lot of things to the cloud, but that is also doesn't come without its challenges. There's already so much data out there, and the upcoming missions are going to dwarf all that data. And so we're building the right infrastructure with open science approaches in mind, and making sure that it's scalable and people get to benefit from all that available data. And finally, another thing is that for everybody, again, that we fund as it relates to research opportunities in space and earth science, now as a part of the application process, people need to submit an open science and data management plan. So that's how we're kind of trying to push those open science principles more into the community as well. But since I mentioned the data, I think if people want to take advantage of open data, they also need to understand the issues around data licensing. And so I'm going to pass it on to our NOAA colleague, Derek Hanson, to speak some more about that aspect of open science. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And that was a great segue. So yeah, like I said before, I'm an attorney at NOAA, but I'm also the chair of a law and policy subgroup at the Group on Earth Observations. So I'm going to mainly speak about that, but happy to answer any questions as well about what NOAA is doing specifically on this subject. So next slide, please. So first, sort of why data licensing? Why is this important? I think a lot of times in our community, we've spoken about full and open data by default, free and open, and that's worked for many years, right? I think our community has understood what that means, and within the U.S., the Landsat example that was mentioned before, and NOAA's own data has been full and open. But nowadays, I think a lot of users expect to see a license, right? So that statement provides insufficient legal certainty for a number of users, especially those that are not as well versed with this community, the CS community and the GEO community. On the other hand, you see sort of the other end of the spectrum, from no real license to very formal licenses. It might be called an end user license agreement, or a EULA, or terms and conditions that you might click through, or you might have to print out and sign. For some data sets, there might be 3 or 4 different documents that you have to sign before you can use full and open data. And often that includes legally problematic terms, right? So it might be sort of unclear on what's permissible use. Is it only for scientific use, for research use? Could it be used for operational purposes or for commercial purposes? And it might require close legal review to understand. There's also, even for government agencies such as NOAA, oftentimes it'll have terms that we cannot consent to. It might be subject to foreign law or foreign courts, or have indemnification clauses that require potential payment to the operator if there's a lawsuit. So that uncertainty, both either having no license or a very dense 20-30 page set of terms, both create uncertainty and lack of consistency, which is a barrier to use. So I think that's why we're starting to see the international community move towards standard open data licenses. It's also one of the principles and the FAIR principles under the R, which is why we're talking about it here. And I think it's becoming increasingly important as well as we're moving towards this era of big data, where it's not just one data set you're trying to understand, but it might be hundreds or thousands of data sets. And also with artificial intelligence, machine learning, right? If you're trying to incorporate large amount of data sets, we've heard this verified from very sophisticated data users. There's no data set or custom data license. They might just skip the data and not use it altogether. So next slide, please. What we've done in GEO, in our subgroup, is we developed data licensing guidance. So in Geo, if you're familiar with Geo, with the Geo data sharing principles, it was really sort of foundational to its founding, which again used the terms full and open sharing of data. And so we wanted to look at standard data licenses and make it easy for people to apply them and identify which ones would be consistent with those principles. So we identified 3. 2 are from Creative Commons. Another one is from Open Data Commons. They basically just clarify that there's no restrictions on use. The attribution one does require attribution. Even with the other ones, attribution is encouraged. And it also includes things like a disclaimer of warranty built into it. And they can really be, if it's clearly applied in the metadata under a rights field or a license field, it can be used automatically. There's nothing to sign, there's nothing to interpret or negotiate. It's just very clear to any data user what their permission is to use. And what we said in the guidance is that GEO members, participating organizations, and others that want to share open, unrestricted data should clearly license their data using one of these licenses and should not modify it. If it's not open data, you can't share it openly, then these don't really apply, right? But I think today's discussion and most of our work in CIOS and in GEO is around data that can be shared without restriction. There's a link there to the guidance. You should also be able to search for it, and I think it's on the final slide as well, where you can read in more detail. And again, we're also seeing this in other organizations have adopted similar guidance. So I think it's not really earth-shattering guidance here. It should be consistent with what you're seeing other organizations do. And Creative Commons itself came out with a guide very recently specific for sharing climate data that has a lot of great implementation guidance that I'd be happy to share if there's any interest, but you should all be able to find that by searching. Next slide, please. And I think this is my final slide. I'll just note, of course, open science involves, as we heard earlier, sharing of not just data, but publications, software, other things. So we are, our subgroup is working to develop, or is planning to develop software licensing guidance, similar to the data licensing guidance, sometime this year. But we're really so far, and in the meantime, I just encourage you to look at groups like the Open Source Initiative that have approved licenses that are consistent with, very commonly understood and accepted definitions for open source licenses. So you might see licenses, you might have heard of licenses like Apache 2.0, LGPL, the MIT license. Those are all sort of similar to the Creative Commons for data or for publications, very well understood and accepted within the broad community, not just our community, but if we want to, our data and software and publications to reach broader public, those are generally instantly understood and removes that artificial and unnecessary barrier to use and to openness. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, I think Sydney, you said you want to bring us home here with the next 2 slides.
Oh yeah, thank you very much. Check my camera on. Awesome. So that was just what we have been working on in the past couple of years regarding open science, but I do want to acknowledge a couple of things. Number one, open science as a principle and a concept has been a part of CIOS for a long time, sometimes using different terminology or language. But it's been part of CIOS's core principles and foundations since the beginning, which was increasing sharing across different space agencies, for example. And certainly in CapD, it's always been a major component for all of us. So there's some history there that I just want to acknowledge. It's not a brand new initiative necessarily, but the way we've all approached it is quite different. So just to share in the future, the way TOPS intends the transform to open science trend is going in the next 5 years. Their goals are to accelerate scientific discovery and, as Yasha mentioned, broaden participation from historically excluded communities, and of course to increase the understanding and adoption of open science principles and techniques. And that's kind of across the entire field, with the whole goal of just increasing participation, accessibility, knowledge, to embrace new technologies that we are all sharing, and really get ready to accept all the great challenges that we have in earth science in this upcoming year. And so on the last slide, I'm sorry, I can't click between my two screens without resharing. But on this last slide, we're having a lot of resources to share. So some of the things that we mentioned today, and then a couple of additional announcements as well. So a couple places you can join in the community if you want. For example, we have a LinkedIn group and a blog, a monthly newsletter that you can follow along if you want to hear the latest about open science, specifically at NASA and through TOPS. We also offer an Open Science 101 training, so you can earn an Open Science badge that gets associated with your ORCID ID, or if you just want to learn more about some of the things we talked about today. And then we also have included in here some Open Science success stories from the USGS. We have links to the NOAA One-Stop and Geo Open licensing that we had mentioned. So we're going to share this afterwards. This is your resource for any of the things we talked about today. You want to learn more, you can click down the rabbit hole with all these links. And I think that's our final slide. So we now have time for any questions about what we've talked about. And also really we welcome any discussion about open science, the principles we've discussed, anything that's going on within your agencies, or questions and issues you've seen, anything like that, we're totally open to discuss. So thanks y'all for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Sydney, Yasha, and Derek. Anything in the chat, Yasha, that you see yet?
Not yet, but I'd love to hear from folks. And again, this is, I think, it's been a slightly more US-centered, presentation, but we know that open science knows no borders, and I'm sure there are examples of this work happening elsewhere. So we'd love to learn more about those examples. We have participants that are aware of similar activities elsewhere.
I'll do a quick one with, I've got a question for Derek. So are you working with any other entities outside of GEO? I may have missed it in your presentation, but we have kind of similar to under the hat that I wear in CEOS to do with analysis ready data and standards and definitions of terminology that everybody's kind of talking about the same concept. So are you talking to any other entities outside of GEO to kind of define what licensing is for data?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I'm certainly trying to. And thanks for the invitation here to speak today with CEOS.
Absolutely.
I'm working with my colleagues at NOAA to find appropriate venues to bring this up. I think it does apply, to a lot of our multilateral activities, because most of them are founded in our practice on open data sharing as sort of a bedrock principle that enables all the other science. And we're sharing data with, the same entities and users as well in those different venues. I think the same principles apply. I've really started to reach out to the World Meteorological Organization as one group that also just recently updated they have a new unified data policy, and they mentioned licensing. So that's probably the most practical. And then also just on a bilateral basis, we've tried to talk with partners, trying to incorporate this into our agreements, right? And then also we're trying to roll it out for our own data, of course, at NOAA, right? Start applying it to in the metadata record for our data that we release. And we've done that for some data sets. We're still in the process of continuing to roll that out. I also mentioned Creative Commons, right? So Creative Commons is a participating organization in GEO. They've done a lot of work aside for many years on the subject, and they do have a couple climate initiatives that they've been very helpful. I'll drop in the chat their guidance that they pulled together a group that included us and some of our European partners and others. So I am seeing, I think, organizations and large data providers start to move in this direction. But yeah, always happy to find any other groups or individuals to speak to. So happy for anyone on this webinar to reach out to me.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, I've always assumed that if the data is open, that the licensing is pretty much comes along and is given that that won't be an issue. So it's an aspect that I've never thought about of this open science initiative and free and open data paradigm that we're in. So yeah, thanks for your insight today. Okay, there's a comment in the chat. Question: seems like algorithms are less easy to share than data sets. Would agree. Do entities like GitHub have utility for government scientists who wish to share their programming, or is that inappropriate?
I can chime into that one.
Yep, you can go. I got a
It's
comment.
definitely not inappropriate, and it's something that we are already doing. So I think in the open science discovery engine that I shared an example of, one of those is just being able to search all of the available code. You can filter by code. So if you're looking for code to do X, Y, or Z, you can search there to find it. But that's a huge component of this, is sharing all of the algorithms, information, how we're doing the processing openly on GitHub so that it's reproducible for a wide variety of folks, not just those that are literate and can write their own code themselves to do it. So that's a really large component of all this. And one of the best places to find actually TOPS resources is the TOPS GitHub. That's where I go for all these kinds of images and slides and things like that. It's more than just code that they have available on there. But that's definitely a yes.
Yeah, and I would back that up as well from the USGS side. At least the level 2 products that USGS create from Landsat, so that's surface reflectance and surface temperature. Although they're not out there right now, they are working to make those algorithms publicly available. We publish we call them ATBDs, or algorithm theoretical basis documents. Those are available online, user guides, a full suite of documentation of how the algorithm is executed and what certain quality flags are within an algorithm. We're very transparent in all of that. And the USGS does have a GitHub repository as well that they're going to be releasing their algorithms to as well. Definitely moving the needle towards that completely free and open.
And I'll just throw in, sorry, Chris, I'll just throw in from NOAA's perspective as well. We do have an official NOAA GitHub page. It's very sparse. We need to get better at centralizing, the searchability of our data sets, or sorry, our code. But we are also developing a policy on software release and attempting to do a similar thing of using standard open source licenses for those software. And we do have some high profile flagship initiatives that are really meant to embrace open source, community development. Epic is our most high profile one, which is about sharing our flagship weather models and actively soliciting community input on that code. So we're definitely attempting to not just share the data, or share the software, but create a community where we can benefit from the open source community.
Thanks, Derek. Anybody have any other comments? Feel free to put in the chat, or you're welcome to unmute.
If I could, I'd really love to hear either in the chat or out loud from some of our colleagues in other countries about, I guess, their feelings about open science, if it's well accepted in their communities, if it goes by a different name, if it's not really so popular as it is in the United States right now. If anyone wants to chime in about, an international perspective, I'd really appreciate that.
Well, I'm originally from Mexico. I'm in Canada right now, and if it weren't for some of the free access data, I wouldn't have been able to do my master's thesis. So that was very important to me, and it's like I feel like in Mexico, I wouldn't dare talk about in Canada, but in Mexico, I think it's a very important aspect to have open data.
Absolutely. And were they from a wide range of EO platforms, or specifically from North America, or?
Well, I was doing some erosion analysis on the coasts of Mexico. So specifically, it was very interesting to see what I was able to access, even historical data of the region.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, one thing that I'm very cognizant of we talked about this earlier this morning, I think, Yasha, of making data sets available and accessible in the cloud. And obviously, the USGS did that with Landsat a number of years ago now. We're trying to move the paradigm of people and scientists wanting to download copies of the data, particularly wanting to do these large time series of analysis of these EO data sets that have been around for quite some time. And we're still having a hard time of kind of moving people away from downloading data and trying to work in the cloud. But not every place around the world has, the speed of internet that a lot of us have the privilege of having access to. So I always try and be cognizant of waving that flag of, yeah, moving to the cloud and putting things in the cloud is not necessarily always improving access for everyone. You may end up inhibiting people's access of being able to work in the cloud if they don't have the capability to download it and work locally on hard drives or get their data from colleagues. So that's something that I always want to try and keep in the forefront of our minds as the cloud has definitely solved a lot of problems. We're able to fast process data, large volumes of data very, very fastly, and get access to ubiquitous access to data around the world very quickly. But then we have to be cognizant that not everybody has that high speed internet at their fingertips all the time. So something that I'm passionate about of making sure we don't forget about. Any other comments? All right, well, be cognizant of your time. We will make this available online. Feel free to share with your colleagues. I noticed that we didn't include any of our contact info on the slide deck, but we could put them in the chat. Or I think you can, is there a contact on the CEOS webinar announcement that you sent out, Yash, or is there any POC there?
We'll definitely be sending a follow-up note to everybody who is here,
Okay,
so we can
perfect.
include that in that update with a link to the recording and slides, so everybody can access all the different links that were shared today.
That's terrific. Excellent. Well, thank you all again for your time. Thanks again to our speakers, and wish you a pleasant rest of the day. Bye-bye.